Introducing
Pretty Girls Love Real Estate. Stories of everyday women breaking barriers and building wealth through real estate.
Let's get it. Boss. BOSS.
Hello. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Pretty Girls Love Real Estate podcast. My name is Jessica Washington. I am your host, and I'm super excited for my next guest. Her name is Marjorie Tsang, and she is a rock star, a pioneer, especially in the New York real estate world. She had the privilege of working with the third largest pension fund in the country, which is the New York State Employees Pension Fund. And she's doing a bunch of wonderful things with her career now. So I want to talk to her about everything and just how her transition has been. But first and foremost, Marjorie, how are you? Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I'm doing great. Everyone in the family is well. Things are opening up again. So it's exciting to think about what else is out there. Oh, I want to go to this conference. Oh, I want to learn about this. So, and I'd love to have a coffee with you. I'd love to go walking with you and find out what you're doing. So these are things that we missed in the months of lockdown.
Absolutely. Like, this is great to be able to talk to people like you via Zoom, but it's nothing like being in person again. So hope to be able to see you soon in person as well.
Yes.
All right. So let's start from the beginning. Makes the most sense. How did you become interested in real estate in the first place?
Well, I wanted to be a lawyer from junior high school. Didn't know what kind, but I wanted to be a lawyer. So after law school, I figured, okay, I will go into banking or corporate. But what I said to myself is that I needed to make sure I was in a firm that allowed me to rotate through different departments, because I always feel it's important to get a view and don't lock yourself in. And so at real estate was my last rotation. And I thought I'll get this over with, and then I'll go back to banking. But I loved it. I loved the people. I loved the work. I loved the clients. I loved that I had responsibility and that I could see a career path and grow. Believe it or not, I was the only girl. I was the only woman in the group. And there were people in the firm who pulled me into their offices and said, don't do it. Don't commit to real estate. They'll kill you. They're terrible. Those men are awful. And I thought, I don't get that. I don't sense that. And so I went with my gut, and I felt that I got treated like everybody else. I got yelled at. I got criticized. I got new work. I got lots of work, but I learned so much. So that's how I started being in the real estate legal area. My focus was finance. I represented commercial banks, pension funds, insurance companies in lending, and also workouts and bankruptcies. I also represented corporations in mergers and acquisitions and acquiring properties, that kind of thing. So it was a pretty broad practice.
Got you. So you've had your hand in basically everything. How did you feel as a woman, I guess, in that environment, especially with the, pension fund, these larger hedge funds where they have a ton of assets under management? Obviously, there's a lack of diversity. So how did you feel when you were in that role?
So, so from being a lawyer, I was in a law firm, and then I moved over to be in-house real estate counsel. But I went to the office of the state comptroller, and the state comptroller at the time was Carl McCall, the first African-American man in that position. My general counsel was an African-American woman, Paula Chester. I always want to honor her. And I felt at home, and I felt supported and empowered. So I kind of did not feel much pressure that I'm different and I'm a woman, or I'm Asian, or whatever. Partly because of the seat, let's be honest. People wanted to talk to us.
Right.
So they weren't going to be snarky. They weren't going to be dismissive. And I just learned to do my job.
You know what? One thing that really has still resonated with me to this day, like when I first met you in 2018, when you were getting the Founders Award for Council of Urban Real Estate. Shout out to Kira, by the way, up in New York. And during your acceptance speech, one thing that stuck with me is that you said, instead of kind of looking at diversity or the lack of as a crutch, like if you're different, if you look different, if you talk different, you know, if you're from a different background, use that to your advantage when you walk into a room with people that are kind of all the same. So can you kind of expound on how you feel about that?
You know, I think it comes back to you need to be very comfortable in your skin. And this gets to a lot of issues about diversity. How do we bring in more diverse managers? Unfortunately, it's going to take a lot of change in society. But I think what it ultimately comes down to is that we have to embrace, we being individuals, managers, departments, CEOs, legislators, you know, go down the list.
Mhm.
We need to embrace that different is good. And it doesn't mean different skin color, different geographic, ethnicity, different gender. It means diversity of thought. It means diversity of approach,
Mhm.
right? I remember very actively trying to hire someone, not from the New York area, even though we were a New York pension fund, but from someone from California, because he had a different perspective. And
Mhm.
so I lament that this is going to be a huge lift, generational, maybe too generational, for people to accept that being different is good, having different opinions in the room is good. And I've seen it. I remember during the GFC, a lot of managers thought alike and they got the same results. There were some investment committees that had diversity. What do I mean by that? They had credit committee in there. They had research. They didn't just have acquisitions. And we had one transaction, we had one manager where research shot down an acquisition, actually many, did not make the acquisitions people very happy. But in hindsight, they saved us.
Right.
You know, so it was a diversity of thought in the room that said, let's look at it from a different perspective. Does this make sense? Is this correct? So I hope that's responsive to your question.
Yes, absolutely. And that kind of spurred two questions that I'm thinking about. First of all, I want to kind of go back to just talking about a pension fund in general, and some of the mechanics of that. So you all, I believe when you were done, you were saying you had like $150 billion of assets under management. So that's, you know, a behemoth. So what are the types of things that pension funds are investing in, and what are some of the criteria they're looking at when they're evaluating deals?
Right. So actually that number is stale. It's somewhere in the 280s at this point. But that's also a function of what do they invest in. So a lot of investment professionals start from taking a look at the universe. What's out there? They don't necessarily look at individual deals. Like first, like, what do we need? What's our personality? What do our retirees and beneficiaries need and when? Based on that, they come up with an asset allocation. Many large public pension funds invest in public equities, public bonds, public debt, because it's easy. You know, it's like IBM, sure, like Apple, yep, Microsoft, we can buy a lot of it. You buy the index. But then you start whittling it down and going, what do I need from an investment standpoint and a risk profile standpoint? Do I want to take a lot of risk? Do I want to roll the dice? Well, should I load up in private equity if I can? Or do I want to play it a little bit more safe because like the New York State pension fund needs to pay out something like 13 or 14 billion dollars in cash a year. How do you come up with 13, 14 billion dollars in cash? You have to invest in corporate bonds. You have to get dividends. You have to be invested in government treasuries to be safe so that you know that you can pay that. So you may not want to invest that much in real estate, but for example, I'll just be generic. For those investors that can afford the illiquidity, they'll say, what does real estate do for me? Real estate can do many different things. It can be opportunistic. I can be developing an office complex in Pittsburgh where property had been redlined, and here's an opportunity. Oh yeah, and let's throw in multifamily in there too, because Pittsburgh is drawing demographics there. So that's opportunistic. Or I could be investing in stable core multifamily that's going to provide you with a steady income every month, every year. So those are the kinds of questions that you look at from the top down, and then you start breaking it down by geography. Right? We don't want everything in New York City. We don't want everything in the Northeast. You know what? Maybe we don't want everything in the US either. So, and we don't want everything in industrial, even though it was the darling, because at some point, and it always happens, it's not going to be the darling. So you want to be diversified so that you have that balance or a good fit somehow.
Now that I'm going down a rabbit hole with this same
Okay.
topic, I promise we'll switch to something else, but I know that you really pride yourself on being a fiduciary. And, you know, right now with this impending recession, they're calling it a recession, they're not calling it a recession. How do you feel about the state of what pension funds are investing in now to protect people's assets that are almost at that retirement age now, you know, with kind of the state of the economy?
Right. So a well-managed pension fund isn't just looking at this today. They've been looking at this for the last 10 years. That's what the asset allocation is supposed to help them achieve. In good and bad times, you'll have that cushion. You'll have cushion to pay. I mean, let's assume we have a crash that everything just freezes. Well, you want a cushion to be able to pay benefits for, let's say, 18 months or 24 months. You want to gradually be moving your portfolio into less risky assets. I heard a podcast by a CIO of a large public pension fund who said, this year we did an asset liability and asset study, and we decided to trade 1% of credit, public corporate credit for 1% of real estate debt, because they saw incremental benefits to doing that. 1% is not really going to tip the balance, right? 1% over 1 year is not, but it's just getting that incremental lift,
right?
So that you can feel that you've positioned your portfolio correctly. And when I say 1% isn't that much, for pension funds like CPPIB or CalPERS, 1% is 4 billion. So we're talking about a fair amount of capital that needs to be moved, managed, you know. So, but think of it like your household. You know, bills are coming up. What do I need to do? Well, I better make sure that this is set aside for utilities, or I have tuition to pay for. I have the rent every month. So it's a very, very expanded budget for pension funds. But never forget that, yeah, it sounds like they have a lot of assets. They have a lot of liabilities too. They have a lot of responsibilities.
Exactly. And I would imagine just the landscape is changing. A lot of people, you know, kind of quit their job during this period after COVID. So the future is definitely going to be different than how we were in the past. And that kind of brings me to the next question, where another topic that you're really passionate about is ESG. And that's kind of the wave of the future. And there's a lot of investment going into that. Can you just want to explain what that means? Because first of all, that's kind of a buzzword people are throwing around these days. So what is ESG, and what are some ways that big firms, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, those with a lot of assets are trying to get invested in that?
Okay, so ESG stands for environmental social governance. These are criteria to take into consideration in one's portfolio, in a corporate, in a company. So let's say Nike and IBM have ESG concerns, environmental, because they want to make sure that they have water in order to, in IBM's case, make chips. Believe it or not, they have to make electronic chips. Nike needs to grow cotton for their sneakers. And S, in terms of their employees, how are their employees treated? Do you have diversity, equity, and inclusion? Are you paying people equitably? And governance, are you managing your institution in an open, transparent way so that you really can be called to task if anything looks untoward? Or that people can come back and say they do their, they get their documents, they get their financials audited. They go through a very open procedure. Their board meetings are open, and the shareholders can participate. But there are many aspects to that. What's getting a lot of attention is the E for environmental, more so now the S. But the E had been going full blast in terms of, we need to make sure that we get to net zero. We need to make sure that we don't emit so much carbon. And there was a huge rush to that. And then unfortunately, there were a lot of potential investors that said, that sounds good, I want to do that. And maybe they didn't do the necessary due diligence. So now there's a backlash. There was a backlash in the prior administration. And I would say that there's more of a public evaluation of, what does this really mean? Is this the right thing to do? And I think the answer for me is, yes, it is the right thing to do, but we need to see, how does it fit for your organization? To me, as I've been trying to say to people, I don't look for a gold badge. I look for, how have I improved something, right? I don't look for model patient of the year. I look for, how much weight have I lost? So don't necessarily look for some, smart building reward or gold star. How much water can you reduce in your building? How much energy can you reduce? And then money. How much can you reduce the operating expenses going forward? And think of Europe. How much can you reduce reliance on fossil fuels from outside of your country and region? So, but to get to your next question, how do you invest in it? It has just exploded. There are many ways to invest and also to incorporate it. In terms of investment, you name it, there are ways to do it. You can invest in solar panels. You can invest in making more EV chargers, electric cars. You can, just so many things. And what I'm doing now, I'm learning so much. You can invest in utilities or intermediaries of utilities to help consumers figure out, how do I make sure that I am using renewable energy? It's actually a fascinating topic. And there are just so many different ways, and many large investors, I'd say all, are dedicating time and staff to investing in maybe venture capital companies, to be able to lock into the next Amazon for environmental issues, or to invest in a technology they can bring internally to their companies in order to be more self-reliant, more environmentally responsible. I wish I could come up with, there's just too many examples that I could name.
Right. Okay.
I'll come up with some along the way.
Oh, no worries.
It's just so, it's so diverse. It's just, you name it, and there's a product for it. I'm learning a lot in terms of how technology can find efficiencies that we didn't really even know about.
So that is a good segue to talk about your company that you're a board member of now, Measurable, which
Right.
Helps to kind of quantify some of the impact that some of these investments are making. So can you talk more about that? And then just in general, what made you want to get involved with this organization?
Right. So Measurabl is a prop tech. It's a venture capital company that has software products that help to measure E.S.G, primarily the E, but through review of utility bills, it can identify where in your portfolio what you're using in energy, waste, water. And what I'm really learning and loving about the company is that it is growing. There are new software products that are being developed. So there are services to be able to help customers and not just say, all right, here's the software, you figure it out. No, there's someone at the end of the phone call who can say, all right, try this, do this, and this is how you get this report. There are products to, and there was a recent acquisition of another company. There is a product now that helps focus on an individual building to determine what are your energy needs, where are you drawing on energy, what time of day. So it's not necessarily like once a month we figure this out. It's every day, every hour, every 15 minutes. So the building owner or manager has a real idea in terms of where are we using energy? How can we reduce our need for it? Maybe it's putting sun guards outside. Maybe it's investing in better air controllers for the HVAC system. But the idea is how do you reduce your use of energy? So how did I get involved in it? I actually had been in discussions with them early on. The CEO, Matt Ellis, cold called me about 5 years ago, pretty much after I left the pension fund. And he said, do you think institutional investors are ready for ESG? I said, yes and no. Yes, they are very concerned, but no, they don't understand it well enough. And I think we're seeing that evolution. They do value it, but they haven't figured out, we haven't figured out how to apply it in the best way possible. So when I heard through a friend that they were looking for a board member, my friend said, can you pass this around, spread the word? And I said, sure, happy to. And I came up with a bunch of names. And then I thought, wait a minute, I'd like to be on the board. So I called my friend and I said, do you think this is a possibility? And she said, yes. So this is part of my lesson. Jessica, you and I have talked about this all the time. Reach for it, go for it. You got to ask. So my friend made a recommendation. I went through the interview process with, I don't know, 20 other candidates, and they picked me. So I've been on the board for almost 2 years.
Awesome. So you're also on a number of other boards, presently and in the past. And just from a general perspective for someone that may be interested in doing that as well, like what's the importance and significance to you of being a part of organizations as a board member?
So my feeling is that this is a service. I am not part of management. As a board member, you are not management. And quite a number of my friends said that to me, who used to be managers, who used to be in charge. And they'd say, that is not your role. Your role is to ask questions, provide guidance, be responsive to management, but you're not pushing the levers at all. But I do feel that being able to share the experiences I've had over the years, some of the contacts who might be helpful to the various boards, the various companies or organizations, is a help. So, or to say, you've got a problem here, or you have a potential issue, maybe you want to look into it. It's definitely a different role. I enjoy it because I've always enjoyed watching people grow, right? Young people grow, or my investments grow. It takes a village. Nothing is just one person's responsibility. So I find it very interesting because it expands my world. I made a real effort not to join any boards where I had been an investor before. I did not want to have that overlap. I figured time for something new.
So what's next for you?
There are a few things cooking. So during COVID, I realized I need to close some chapters in order to make room for other things. So I'm exploring working with an organization to support underserved New York City students from 6th grade on. I'm mentoring quite a number of people. I feel like I'm really learning on the Measurable board, and just like when I was in real estate every day. I mean, I don't know if you find this. Every week I would say, there's a job for that? Someone does that? There's a job for that. Mm-hmm. It's so much broader now. But in the venture capital world, there's so many different roles. And I feel like an incredible newbie. My fellow board members and the management have been very generous with their time, but I'm learning a lot, and I hope I'm contributing as well. I'm giving back to the various organizations I've been a member of. My organization, WX, Women Executives in Real Estate in New York, just started a team with Project Destined. So we help pick mentors. We were oversubscribed by more than 2 times the mentors we needed. I was just overwhelmed with that outpouring. And I think that there are other ways. I think I mentioned earlier, I've always been concerned that we need to discuss and come to terms with DE&I. And I don't feel that we're necessarily doing that well. So I've started doing it one-on-one or with my own group. So I lead a group of friends to have dim sum in Chinatown once a month. And now I say, I have a new feature. I'd like us to share stories about unconscious bias, but from a friendly anecdote perspective. Because I think even though it may be an innocent, sweet anecdote, it's still bias. And I think that that really demonstrates for all of us how far we have to go. So I've done this maybe 3 lunches now. It's been really interesting, but heartwarming. Because I just don't feel that we're getting to it. And I feel like I can't move organizations. That's not where I am now. But I can talk to people.
Do you have a example that you want to share of unconscious bias? Because that's one thing we talk about on the show, is just, having times where you felt challenged or maybe discriminated against because you were a woman or because you were a person of color, especially in this real estate world.
It's not so specific as that, but the one that I share a lot is about 20 years ago. I went to my brother's house for a weekend to babysit his 5.5-year-old and 2-year-old. It was the first time my brother and his wife got away since the little guy was born. And so I was there for the weekend, and the neighbor kid came over, this sweet, blonde, blue-eyed kid. And I was watching where the boys were going to play. And he looked to my nephew and he said, "Is that the new nanny?" And my nephew said, "No, it's just my aunt." So, at 5.5, how do you say your kid is biased? But at 5.5, he had a view that Asian women were nannies.
Right. That someone had to ingrain in them.
That was his world. So, again, I emphasize, it's not bad, it's not good, it's just there. And we all have it. And then I was on a panel. I was actually a panelist on unconscious bias. And my fellow panelists raised an example. And I thought, oh my gosh, I witnessed that. So I had recommended 2 candidates to join my team. And my chief investment officer at the time interviewed them. I was in the interview process. And one was a Caucasian male. And they were from Big Ten schools, so they were talking football, they were just bonding, they were talking about all these things that Big Ten schools talk about. The other candidate was a Hispanic man who had not worked in an institutional setting before. But I wanted that kind of diversity. I wanted someone with an outside perspective to be able to shine light and ask me questions so I could say, oh, okay, we need to focus on this. And afterwards he said, really, is this what you want? I don't know if this guy's a fit. And I thought, yes, he is a fit. And I insisted. And long story short, he turned out to be an excellent employee, excellent. But I watched how that very innocent conversation around Big Ten schools and football, or, you name it, skiing, rugby, right, water polo, or, let's not be biased ourselves. What do women talk about? These are innocent examples, but they are examples of how cultures and companies repeat themselves and perpetuate.
Is there any way I'm just asking you for your opinion, because the real estate world, the world of large finance has been traditionally like a lot of nepotism, very homogenous, as you said. How can we kind of get more people with a diverse thought, diverse background, diverse experience, like career-wise, into that industry?
Right. It's going to be one step at a time. And that's what really frustrates me. And that's why I said I started wanting to make sure that I discuss the topic. And then in part of the discussion with my friends, people would say, well, in our company, we try to have gender neutral resumes so that applicants are being judged on the objective facts. But even companies and pension funds that had the best of intentions said, we haven't found a very good system yet. But then we also have to go back to corporations have to monitor their senior staff. So I also know of situations where good friends, people I know, have left because they felt they really weren't being valued. They knew that they were adding value to the team, but they weren't being recognized with compensation or a title, or but they were there in the RFP process to add diversity to the team. But at one of the PRIAs I attended, one of my very good friends said, look around, we're so much more diverse. And because he was a very good friend, I said, this is not enough. Mm-hmm. You may look it, but are these people being paid the same? Are these people on track to be promoted the same? We won't know this for many, many years. And it is going to take each person to dig deep and say, I see potential in this person who didn't necessarily graduate with all those criteria we usually look for. What's the potential and what do I need to help draw it out? And I feel that I've been a beneficiary of this. So, I mean, I feel that Carl McCall took a chance on me, right, to head up real estate, to move from legal to business. So I feel like I'm an emerging manager. Someone gave me a shot. Who else is going to give a young person a shot, right? Who doesn't look exactly like them, who doesn't have that background, or may have a disability, or may come from a part of the world that's not represented on the team. And you go, well, I don't know if she really is going to fit with everybody. Well, how about work on making sure that she fits?
Right. So a lot of companies will say things like, oh, we want diversity, but we don't know where to find the candidates.
I can't listen to that anymore. That's
And I would say that's like, that's kind of excuse, but I just, on the flip side of that, because I've never really heard anybody say this answer, as a person that's a diverse candidate that wants these type of opportunities, where can I go seek them out? Like, where can I, put the onus back on me as the person that wants to find it, to connect myself with the company as opposed to waiting for them to find me?
right. So I would say that this is similar to women who want to join boards. The advice I give is just tell everybody and be specific, right? You want your elevator pitch to be able to say, I want to work in this kind of company, in this role, with this title, with these responsibilities, in this geographic area, and be very specific. You're not going to get 100% of those points, but you're going to get starters. And I mean, tell everybody, but be sincere about, this is what I'm really looking for. And so, you know me, I like my stories. So when I was starting to think about boards, my mentor brought me to a session of the National Association of Corporate Directors, and a speaker said, my first board, it's hard to get on your first board as a woman. It's just hard to get on your first board. So I talked to everybody. And how did she get on her first board? She told another parent in the playground with their kids. So she got on a utility board in her town. And from there, she made connections and she was able to move on to corporate boards, public boards. So get out there, speak. Here's another thing I would say, and I'm going to say it again later. Have lunches, invite people for drinks, invite people for dim sum. I like to do it because I'm having fun. I'm meeting people. I'm finding out what's going on. So maybe you have a monthly or every other month gathering of trying new restaurants in your neighborhood, whatever. But gather people, be the organizer. Don't always fall into the organizer role. Remember what your mission is. Your mission is getting intel. There's nothing wrong with that. Networking is an important aspect for career development.
I love that. I love that. And also I would put add to that is mentorship. So just, final thoughts. How do you think mentorship from both sides? I know because you've been a mentor to a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of people have mentored you. How has that impacted your career?
It's made a difference. It's the difference between what I could have been and where I am. And that's not necessarily good or bad, but I mean, someone asked me to list my mentors, and my dad was very influential. He was very supportive. He was very demanding. Like, no, do that again. He would hear me speak on the phone and go, call them back and do that again. And then my first mentor in my law firm was a nice Jewish lawyer. And he kicked me in the butt. And he would say, you're doing this wrong. You're not doing this well enough. And those were very hard conversations, but it made me improve. And so I say to people, sometimes your mentor does not look like you. Do not close the door. Your mentor does not necessarily look like you. And then there was a woman who was on our real estate board at the pension fund, and she was so mean to me, so mean to me. And I didn't know what to do. I finally asked a friend who used to work for her, and she connected me with some people and they said, you're not doing this. You need to do this. And I had to work very hard because I thought I was doing a great job. Well, no, I had to lift my game. She made me lift my game. And after she felt that I met her standards, I was her best friend. She would come across a restaurant and say, hi, Marjorie. And she'd bring me over and meet her friends. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm in the club. So lesson number 2, your mentor is not necessarily warm and fuzzy.
Yep. Sometimes the people that see the most potential in you, they want to be hard to, push you to be your best self. So like you said, it's not always the people that talk to you nice and warm and fuzzy that you want to be in your corner.
Right.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, I could talk to you all day, and you have the best stories about just so many things, and you have a wealth of experience. But I want to shift now to the final part of the show, which is the Fabulous Four, the last few questions I ask every guest. So the first question is, what is your favorite book about real estate?
See, I'm a generalist, and I believe that every book focuses on real estate to some extent, if you're reading it and you have your ears open. So my example is Belonging by Michelle Obama. She talked about her neighborhood or neighborhoods where her grandparents lived or other friends lived and how they were received in those neighborhoods. She talked about doing her piano recital in a wholly different part of the city. And I think that that's a beautiful reflection of real estate. I grew up in Little Italy and Chinatown in New York City. It's a village. It was a community, and it's changing. But from a real estate standpoint, it was a moment in time. It's still there, but it's evolving. It's real estate.
Right. I love you said that though, because everything is real estate, not even just from this is where I live, but even businesses. I heard you say on another show, like somebody going through a divorce, like dealing with like splitting up of assets, like everything involves real estate in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
So I love that. All right. The second question is, what advice would you give to your younger self when you were first getting started in real estate?
Go out on more lunch dates, go out for drinks more, right? What I've said now, network, get used to it, learn how to break the ice and get into a conversation and network. And then also take more risks. It took me a long time to make the decision between going from legal to business, a long time. And partly I didn't have people to guide me, but ultimately I decided to take a leap, and those were the best decisions I ever made. So don't just jump willy-nilly, but build up your team, build up your list of advisors so that you can go and say, I have a crazy idea. What do you think?
Love that. I love the advice of being bold and taking risks. All right. The third question is, what topic in real estate do you want to personally learn more about?
So I actually have wanted to get beyond real estate, but as we say, everything is real estate. So just doing venture capital, I mean, Measurabl is what I would call real estate adjacent because it's real estate, right? They cover 13 billion square feet globally. So that's real estate. On the other hand, it's software. It's many different platforms of software. It's a different kind of business. I mean, I feel very overwhelmed when I read And it's forcing me to study up and to research and to try to understand. The terminology is so different. I need that. And I would urge everyone, push yourself to do something different. So the area of real estate, I don't know, it could be another board position that's real estate adjacent, could be retail, could be hospitality. I mean, I used to say before the pandemic, I'd love to be on a board of a travel company. And then the pandemic hit and they got swamped. But why not? You know, maybe a cruise line or whatever, just something different, because I feel that we always have to push ourselves to learn something new. I mean, healthcare, I would like to learn more about healthcare. That's real estate too.
I'm gonna call a quick audible here because it just made me think of something. Is Measurable, or you personally investigating anything further into like digital real estate in the metaverse?
I'm not. I honestly, like I said, if you're not management, you don't know all the ins and outs. So I don't know what they're looking at. But I attended a session recently, a panel unrelated to Measurable on the metaverse. And I would like to learn more about that. I actually am going to suggest that my committee from WX sponsor a site visit to a couple of buildings in New York where they are incorporating technology into their buildings. You know, AR, VR, I think this is all really important. And in some of the conferences I attend, like PRIA, ULI, there are discussions about how are we going to use AR and VR in our real estate practice. These are really critical questions, just like how do we improve our ESG? How do we measure to see how much energy we're using? How do we reduce our footprint? All of these are new questions that we weren't asking ourselves 20 years ago. And I feel that I need to be challenged and continue to challenge myself and say, what's new, what's different? Nothing is ever going to be completely different as long as you're willing to put in the work, do the reading, do the research, ask stupid questions.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so back to the
Fabulous four.
Exactly. All right. So lastly, give a shout out, please, to another woman in real estate.
Okay. Well, as I gave you a heads up, it's going to be to my squad, the rare women. So during COVID, a group of us got together and met on a Zoom meeting every Thursday evening, every other week. And we got ourselves through COVID. We got ourselves through the craziness. And these are women who are my peers. We were pretty much the pioneers of women in real estate at a point in time. And so we knew the same people. We're going off in different directions, which is very exciting. I mean, you've had one of the members on, but the point is that we're not only talking about real estate, we're talking about our lives and where real estate is going. So a couple of people are doing VC. Another member of the rare women is doing venture capital. You've met Mary Beth McCormick. She was in academia. Another woman moved from the pension fund side, the LP side to the GP side. And and then a couple of other people are doing other different things. So RARE stands for recipes and real estate, because life is not all about home. Life is not all about work. There is no perfect balance. It is a tight fit every single day.
I love that name because it, like I said, it blends a little bit of everything, and like the recipe, how to, like the formula for how can we improve. I love that. All right. So lastly, how can people get in touch with you? And also, are there any final thoughts that you want to give, any words of wisdom for the listeners?
Yes. Okay. So look me up on LinkedIn. And when you send me an invite, and I would say do this for everyone, don't send the standard one. Send something personal. I heard you on Jessica's podcast, and that will get my attention, because honestly, a generic request, I just X. And then DE&I heard, I have to give credit where credit is due. I heard this from a woman in venture capital, Anna Mura Co. She said, don't do DEI because it's the right thing to do. Do it because you want to be a greedy capitalist, because you want to have the diversity of experiences on your team. In venture capital, as in everything, you see things from different perspectives. Someone is going to challenge you and say, we're passing up on an opportunity that we really should go back and reconsider. Or, oh, wait a minute, no, I read about that. Someone else is already doing that. So be a greedy capitalist. And I say this about ESG also. Don't do it to save the planet. I'm not doing it to hug a tree. I'm not doing it to save a planet. I'm doing it to make money. I'm doing it to save money, right? I'm doing it because the beneficiaries in the pension fund deserve to have every penny due them and not have it wasted.
I actually love that perspective, because when we talk about these type of things, it's always from the perspective of, oh, I want to do good and I want to help people, which is great, but you also want to help yourself first and foremost.
Yep.
So I love that perspective, and it comes from a good place of wanting to build wealth for, you and your family. So love that. All right, Marjorie, I thank you again so much. This was a great conversation. Always love catching up with you.
Thank you.
Like I said before, we've got to link up at some point in the very, very near future and keep the conversation going.
We've figured out where we're going to be in the same city at the same time. So we will follow up. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I thank you again. Best wishes until I see you soon. And let's log off here. Again, this is Miss Marjorie Tsang. She's a dynamo in real estate, especially in the institutional investing world. But now she shifted her focus to ESG investing, and can't wait to see all the great things that she's got coming forward. So thank you again.
Take care. Bye, everyone.